Inspirational Creatives, episode 280. Welcome to Inspirational Creatives. I'm your host, Rob Lawrence. Join me every Friday as I chat with successful artists, producers, and creative entrepreneurs who share powerful stories and strategies. They can help you to create the life that you want. Listen each week as these inspirational creatives show you how to take your creativity to the next level. You'll learn how to create a sustainable business that inspires others and gives you the financial freedom and lifestyle that you want. Thanks for listening. Make sure you sign up at inspirationalcreatives.com to get free exclusive bonus material. And now, on with the show. Rob here, and a very warm welcome to this short action episode on Inspirational Creatives. In the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you the wisdom, thoughts and ideas of painter and once theatre director John Link, who, if you've been following this podcast, I interviewed earlier this year about his own creative practice and how serious illness recently evolved and further cemented his own perspectives on life and the creative work he does. In this short action episode, we're going to briefly explore with John how vulnerability and uncertainty can make for a more exciting creative journey, whether we're starting a new business, venture or job, or maybe indulging ourselves in a new creative practice, project or pursuit. For the more experienced leaders and artists amongst you, the themes and topics of vulnerability and perhaps uncertainty should be familiar territory for you. After all, there are those that claim that the only certainty in life is uncertainty, and how we embrace uncertainty often determines how well we travel and perhaps how successful we are when moving forward in life with our own creative aims. With this in mind, I'm hoping that the wisdom that John shares with you today offers a refreshing perspective as well as a twist on how to deal with our own vulnerability through the process of letting go of outcomes and having more fun with our own creative journey. So with no further ado, I'd like to begin this episode with a clip from episode 279, part 2 of my chat with John Link, where John and I were discussing his paintings and the characters in his paintings, which, if you've listened to the longer interview chats, you'll know are somewhat inspired by his love for Shakespeare's work. One of the things that particularly stood out for me with John is what he had to say about how his paintings reflect him as a person.
My paintings tend to be about solo people, single people. Sometimes there's a second character involved, as there is with this current painting with the child, but fundamentally the story is in the central character, and so my characters are alone with their issues and problems and their discussions with themselves about where to go next, what road do I take, how do I get rid of the mess I'm in, and so on.
John's brief reflective analysis on his own work reminds me of the quote by writer Irvine Walsh, who once said, "Don't mistake writing what you know for writing about yourself." In episode 279, I asked John what it was about the individuals in his paintings that drew him into their story. My aim behind this question was twofold. One, to learn more about what inspires John and what John sees in his own work, but also to learn more deeply from John what it is that fascinates us about our own work. Here's what he had to say.
What is it about the individuals that draws you to them?
The vulnerability, I think, whether they be kings, queens, or whether they be kind of ordinary folk. I think what draws me to them is their complete vulnerability and their desperate attempt in some way to resolve the issues of being vulnerable, which again is what we all do. I mean, we develop mechanisms to protect ourselves against being hurt or being taken advantage of or so on.
John's answer both fascinated and inspired me. In fact, it was John's response to this question that led me to creating this particular short action episode for you. John reminded me that to engage in any adventure or creative pursuit, we inevitably need to embrace our own vulnerability. We will need courage. Live as well as you dare, writer Sydney Smith once said. John reminds us that by embracing our vulnerability, we can venture into new and often uncertain territory. John explains.
But in that territory is where core things happen in terms of human endeavour. Mm-hmm. Out of that vulnerability comes, not always successful solutions, but always something that is interesting, which adds to the story.
By embracing our own vulnerability, we can often find ourselves on a more successful path, at the very least a more interesting one. Perhaps with our egos out of the way, we can focus on what truly matters, whatever that may be. John uses his theatre directing experience to explain this concept further from the point of view of an actor. As you're listening to this next clip, I encourage you to consider ways in which you could become more vulnerable in your own work, leading towards that pot of gold and, dare I say, more authentic work which engages more deeply with others.
I always found that working with actors, when I was working with actors, an actor's most powerful weapon is his vulnerability. That ability to strip himself of any protective gloss as an individual and allow his inner self to connect with whatever he or she is trying to do with the play, the character, whatever. That's not easy, because we think, actors, they just put on a funny hat or a funny face and they're all very confident and so on, cocky and able to... They're actually not, most of them. And the ones that don't have that quality are more often than not terribly interesting actors. Maybe very successful. That's a whole different ballgame. And the world is full of actors or performers and painters and musicians who are kind of pretty crap, but very, very successful. So that's a different kind of measure we're in. But for me, the really classy, the really good writers, the really good actors, the really good musicians, the really good painters are the ones that kind of can allow that inner thing to connect.
John taught me that an actor's most powerful weapon is his vulnerability. Connecting with your true inner self is not easy. As John states, the actors without that quality are often less interesting actors. By being able to connect directly, or at least more directly, with who we truly are, and by the way, that requires vulnerability, we can often create a more authentic performance in the work that we do, or a better product or service. I believe this is true regardless of your creative discipline. In episode 279, I asked John how his painting work has allowed him to become more vulnerable at a personal level. John surprised me with yet another new perspective on this business of vulnerability and living with uncertainty, and it's to do with outcomes.
Well, I suppose there's I hope in the work there's a kind of honesty in the work. I try not to get engaged with outcomes, the end product. I mean, clearly there's a sense in which one is aiming for something, but one can't tell the end of the story till you've told the beginning, if you see what I mean. So there's a kind of journey, there's a kind of process. And it's quite interesting working with actors, because often the actor wants certainty. He wants to know, he wants to be secure. So he will tend instinctively and intuitively to go for outcomes. How will I look? How will I be? Will this be successful? There's things that attach themselves to the end product.
Even though there is an outcome of sorts that John is aiming for, John tries not to get engaged in outcomes. What the end product could be, or indeed must be. With both his theatre directing and his painting work, John suggests that you can only create a story and know where that story is leading to when you begin to explore that story, when you start that story. What I feel John is suggesting here is that we don't know what the journey, any journey, will be like. That is, the map is not the territory, so to speak, until we start that journey. Uncertainty is inevitable. The only certainty we have is uncertainty. And the more we accept this fact, the more that we can find confidence and courage in our own creative abilities to navigate the ever-changing currents of life, knowing that whatever is thrown at us, it will be okay. We will get there. We can't be certain about a journey or a story until we begin it.
The task is to allow the journey to happen. And of course, when you read a play, you know the end of the play, so in a sense the actor's got to forget that. And there's a kind of sense in which the actor subliminally enters into a contract with the audience, ultimately, who return that compliance by entering into the world of fantasy and make-believe, and a pretense that what's happening in the space is fresh, new and spontaneous, and they're making it up as they go along.
The task, therefore, is to allow the journey to happen. It's about accepting who we are and believing in what we do, trusting that we will get there, even if our creative work is make-believe. For John, painting is a relatively new career, and one that has allowed him to explore who he is in the world today and his own vulnerability in a new way.
Paintings give me a fresh excitement about investigating who we are, who I am, to a certain extent, of course, because my paintings reflect me.
To wrap up this short action episode today, we can learn from John, I believe, that the best leaders, artists, content creators and producers succeed in times of uncertainty by embracing their vulnerability. And this means taking a risk. Risking ourselves to exposure of being judged and commented upon. And deep down we may fear being excluded from the tribe, or perhaps worse, not understood by the tribe. Yet in this day and age, we live in relatively safe times, amongst our peers that is, where we can take more risks, and we can afford to take more risks by tapping into that more vulnerable part of ourselves, which offers us the opportunity to show up in the world in a more authentic and genuine way. Accepting who we are and what we believe in is a brave and courageous thing to do. It's what the best actors do, it's what great painters and musicians do too. By connecting with that part of us, the most vulnerable part of who we are, it is from there that we can begin to explore and find the courage to do what we need to do, whatever it is that's calling us in this moment, to create something meaningful in this world. And let's hope with that we can have a lot more fun.
What I do is fun. There's nothing much different from painting a picture than creating a character in the space with an actor or telling a story.
I'd like to invite you to consider from today's short action episode these two questions. 1, how is your creative work reflecting who you are in the world today? And 2, what risks are you taking to create the very best for those that you serve? I hope that this short action episode has been both meaningful and useful to you in some way today. Let me know how it's resonated with you by dropping me an email at rob@inspirationalcreatives.com. If you'd like to hear more of John's wisdom, head on over to inspirationalcreatives.com, click on episodes and look for episode 279, where you can hear part 2 of my interview chat with John, and 277 for part 1. Stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe in your favourite podcast listening app, and I'll chat to you soon. Thanks for listening. Nothing beats the stories and advice of an expert to help you raise your creative game. I would love to know what you thought about today's episode, so don't forget to subscribe in iTunes, where you can rate and review the show. If you like this episode, I invite you to share it on Facebook or Twitter with the one person you know who will benefit from the wisdom shared here today. You can find the show notes on inspirationalcreatives.com/podcast. If you have a burning question or a great idea for a guest, head on over to inspirationalcreatives.com/contact, where you can connect with me there.